I speak 9 languages, said the son of the African housemaid. The Arab tycoon laughed but was stunned. Haha. 9 languages. Khalid al-Rashid's laughter thundered through his Dubai Marina penthouse office like the roar of a lion mocking its prey. Kid, you can barely speak proper English. Samuel Carter, only 14 years old, stood clutching his worn-out backpack, his eyes burning with quiet defiance despite the sting of humiliation. Beside him, his mother, Miriam Carter, 43, gripped the handle of her cleaning trolley so tightly that her knuckles turned white, regretting ever allowing her son to accompany her that morning. Khalid al-Rashid, a 50-year-old oil magnate and one of the wealthiest men in the Middle East, was savoring his amusement. The son of his maid had just claimed mastery of 9 languages, a statement Khalid found more ridiculous than entertaining. Samuel apologized to Mr. al-Rashid, Miriam whispered urgently, her voice breaking under the weight of years spent swallowing insults to keep a job that barely kept her family alive. There is no need for apologies, Khalid said smoothly, leaning back in his Italian leather chair. I want to hear this fantasy. Come on, boy wonder. Tell me, what 9 languages do you think you know? Samuel inhaled deeply. At 14, he already understood that the world judged him not by his abilities but by his skin, his mother's occupation, and the tiny flat they lived in within the poorer districts of Sharjah. English, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, Italian, and Portuguese, he answered clearly, his voice steady. For the first time, Khalid's smirk faltered. Liar, he barked, rising from his mahogany desk. Miriam, your son needs psychological help. He creates fantasies to escape his miserable life. This is why poor families stay poor. They raise dreamers. Miriam lowered her head in shame, her throat burning with suppressed tears. She had scrubbed Khalid's floors, polished his marble, counters, and endured his arrogance for 6 years. Yet seeing her son belittled cut deeper than all the indignities she had borne. Mom, Samuel whispered softly, touching her arm. It's all right. Khalid sneered at the display of affection. He relished these moments, where he could crush both mother and son under the weight of his superiority. He had built his empire with ruthlessness, always reminding others of their place. You know what I think? He said, tapping his gold pen against the desk. Your son envies my executive's children. They go to the American School of Dubai, they fly first class, they dine with royalty. Meanwhile, he invents lies to feel important. Sir, Samuel interrupted, his calmness startling Khalid. Do you speak Arabic? Khalid raised an eyebrow. Of course. It is my mother tongue. Samuel's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Then you will understand this. Al-Haqiqa, Tahrir. The words sliced through the air like glass. For the first time in years, Khalid froze. Samuel's classical Arabic was flawless. Not the conversational dialect tourists or casual learners memorized, but sophisticated, rich with precise grammar. Miriam looked from her son to Khalid, confused by the shift in atmosphere but unable to understand the meaning. Where did you learn that? Khalid demanded, his voice lower, uncertain. At the public library in Sharjah, Samuel answered. They offer free language programs every afternoon. Khalid felt something alien crawl into his chest, a flicker of respect or perhaps unease. He tried to shake it off. Anyone can memorize a phrase. That doesn't mean you speak the language. You're right, Samuel replied evenly. That's why I brought this. From his backpack, he pulled out a stack of certificates. Khalid's eyes narrowed as he scanned them. The first was a proficiency certificate in multiple languages from New York University, Abu Dhabi. Stamped and signed. Another showed his completion of an advanced linguistics program run by the Emirates Education Council. Yet another displayed his certification from an international online translation course. Khalid's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through them. The stamps were genuine, the signatures authentic, the progression logical. This boy, this maid's son, was not lying. He was extraordinary. How? Was all Khalid could mutter. But Samuel was not finished. He retrieved a tablet, unlocked it, and opened a video call. Within seconds, the screen revealed a middle-aged Chinese woman in a university office. "Professor Lin," Samuel greeted her in crisp Mandarin. "Could you confirm for Mr. Al-Rashid my performance in your business translation course?" The professor's face lit up. She replied rapidly in Mandarin, the conversation flowing with ease, Samuel shifting between formal and colloquial registers like a native speaker. Then in English, she added, "Mr. Al-Rashid, Samuel has been my most gifted student in 15 years. At his age, I have never seen such mastery." Khalid snapped the call off abruptly, a cold sweat breaking across his brow. Miriam stared, bewildered, pride swelling within her despite her confusion. Samuel had been studying quietly, using the library while she worked endless shifts, and she had not realized the magnitude of his accomplishment. "I started when I was 11, Samuel explained gently. "My mother worked 2 jobs until she lost one during the pandemic. When I returned to public school, the lessons were too easy, so I decided to spend my free time learning languages." Khalid sank into his chair, shaken. His own children had tutors from Oxford and Cambridge, private coaches flown in weekly, yet this boy had surpassed them with nothing but discipline and dusty library books. "But why languages?" he asked, his voice subdued. "Because," Samuel replied, "when you speak to people in their language, they stop seeing you as a stranger. They start seeing you as human." The observation hit Khalid like a blow. For years he had excused his coldness toward his employees by citing cultural differences, when in truth it had always been arrogance. "Samuel," he murmured, "you are only 14. This is impossible." "The impossible," Samuel answered softly, "is only the possible that hasn't happened yet." Khalid looked at Miriam differently now, seeing not just a maid but a woman who had raised a genius while enduring poverty and humiliation. "Why come here today, Samuel?" he asked carefully. "Do you know your mother could lose her job?" Samuel exchanged a glance with Miriam, who nodded faintly. "Because I overheard your call yesterday," Samuel said. "You were speaking with Saudi investors in Arabic, but you used the wrong terms. It nearly cost you the contract." Khalid's face drained of color. He remembered the confusion in the investors' voices but had blamed the poor phone connection. "What mistakes?" he asked. "You said Mubashir when you meant Mustajil, and confused Muraik with Muraib when discussing timelines. Small words, but they changed everything." Khalid's breath caught. Those errors could have sabotaged a $70 million deal. "And that," Samuel continued, pulling out yet another document, "is why I came prepared." He handed Khalid a detailed report analyzing Al-Rashid Holdings' international communications. It highlighted repeated linguistic errors, mistranslations in contracts, and cultural missteps that explained millions lost in failed deals. Khalid skimmed the report, his hands trembling. It was brilliant. "Why would you do this?" he whispered. "Because I wanted to prove that value doesn't come from money or last names," Samuel said quietly. "It comes from what you can give." For the first time in decades, Khalid felt the walls of his arrogance shaking, but he didn't realize Samuel's greatest weapon was still hidden in that battered backpack. Something that would not just humble him, but force him to reckon with the darkest truth of his empire. Khalid al-Rashid sat frozen, clutching the boy's report as if it were a weapon aimed straight at his empire. The mahogany walls of his Dubai office suddenly felt like a cage, every towering glass window reflecting not his wealth, but his vulnerability. For the first time in years, the man who prided himself on absolute control felt cornered. Samuel stood calmly, his hands folded over his worn backpack as if this entire confrontation had been rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. Miriam kept glancing between her son and her employer, her heart hammering with fear and awe. "You saved me from losing millions," Khalid whispered, struggling to reconcile his pride with the boy's brilliance. "No," Samuel corrected, gently. "I gave you a chance to save yourself." He reached into his backpack again, this time pulling out a small digital recorder. The metallic click of the play button filled the silence. Then Khalid's own voice spilled out across the marble office. These Africans are all the same. Lazy, uneducated, always asking for more than they deserve. That's why I never promote them. Important positions should go to Arabs and Europeans, not them. Miriam's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Khalid's face drained of blood. He remembered that conversation. He had been descending in the elevator with his vice president, carelessly venting frustrations. He hadn't realized Samuel had been in the corner, silent, listening. Where did you record this? Khalid stammered, his voice suddenly fragile. In the elevator last week, Samuel answered evenly. You didn't notice me. Khalid's hands curled into fists. That was private. You can't record me without my consent. This is Dubai, Samuel replied calmly. The law is strict, yes. But if this reached the Labor Ministry or the international press, it would be catastrophic. Systematic racial discrimination in Al Rashid Holdings. Do you want to imagine the headlines? The billionaire's heart pounded. His empire wasn't just oil, it was real estate, tourism, international trade. Investors from Europe, America, and Asia had always watched him carefully. A scandal like this could collapse partnerships, cost billions, and destroy the reputation he had cultivated. What do you want? Khalid whispered, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. Samuel's eyes hardened. A choice. He placed the recorder gently on the desk as though it were a ticking bomb. You can continue to treat people like me and my mother as inferior, and this recording will reach every major journalist and government office within hours. Or you can prove you've learned something today. Khalid swallowed, his throat dry. And what would that proof look like? Samuel's voice carried a firmness far beyond his years. First, you promote my mother to facilities supervisor, with a proper salary and respect. Second, you establish a scholarship program for talented children from disadvantaged backgrounds, so that others like me can learn without being dismissed. Third, you hire me as a junior language consultant in your company. Khalid's jaw dropped. You're only 14. No company in the Gulf hires children. And yet I speak 9 languages better than any adult in your building. Samuel replied without hesitation. I've already shown I can save you millions. Don't tell me age matters when competence is staring you in the face. Miriam gasped softly, unable to believe her son's boldness. Khalid looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He didn't see just a maid anymore. He saw a woman who had raised a prodigy while scrubbing his floors, who had sacrificed everything to provide a chance at greatness. His arrogance cracked. You've raised a genius, Khalid murmured. Miriam lifted her chin, her eyes burning with dignity. I've raised a man who knows his worth. Samuel reached into his backpack once more and slid a typed contract across the desk. The clauses were precise, professional, and legally binding. Protection against retaliation, terms of the scholarship program, and his mother's promotion. Khalid picked it up with trembling hands. How do I know you won't leak the recording even if I sign this, he asked. Samuel's gaze was unflinching. Because unlike you, I believe in giving people second chances, if they truly want to change. The billionaire's chest heaved. For decades he had lived in a world where money erased mistakes, where apologies were never necessary, where cruelty was power. Yet here was a child, his maid's son, forcing him to face the truth. The weight of his choices pressed down on him like never before. He looked at the contract again. The demands weren't outrageous. In fact, they were conservative compared to the fortune Samuel could have extorted. But signing it meant admitting he had been wrong his whole life. What if I don't sign? Khalid asked weakly. Samuel pulled out his phone, scrolling with calm precision. Then this recording will reach Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and the Ministry of Human Resources in exactly... He glanced at his watch. 4 minutes. Khalid's hands shook as he held his gold pen. He could almost feel the entire empire he had built balancing on the edge of this decision. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed the pen to the paper and signed. There, he whispered. It's done. Samuel picked up the recorder and tucked it safely into his backpack. Then he extended his hand. "Welcome to the future, Mr. Al-Rashid." Khalid hesitated, then clasped it, realizing he was sealing not just a contract but a new way of living. For the first time in decades, his laughter, soft, genuine, almost boyish, escaped his lips. "You terrify me, Samuel," he admitted. "Not because you're dangerous, but because you're prepared." 6 months later, the skyscrapers of Dubai gleamed beneath the desert sun as Khalid al-Rashid sat inside a community hall in Deira. Around him were dozens of young people from poor neighborhoods, holding books, laptops, and dreams made possible by the Carter Scholarship Fund, the very program Samuel had demanded. Miriam stood beside him, dressed in a navy suit, now the respected supervisor of facilities across Al-Rashid Holdings. Pride radiated from her as she guided new scholarship recipients through their applications. At the front of the hall, Samuel Carter, now 15, sat with a stack of international contracts on his desk. His corrections and translations in the last 6 months had saved Khalid's company nearly $250 million. Reporters whispered about him as the youngest corporate consultant in Middle Eastern history. During a break, a journalist approached Khalid. "Mr. Al-Rashid, is it true that this boy forced you into hiring him?" Khalid chuckled softly. "Yes, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." The journalist blinked. "Why?" Khalid's eyes settled on Samuel. "Because he reminded me of who I used to be. I came to this country as a poor teenager, barely speaking English, mocked for my accent. I built my empire from nothing. But somewhere along the way, I forgot my origins. Samuel forced me to remember." Miriam smiled quietly, her son's hand resting on hers. Samuel looked at the crowd of young scholars and said, "When you invest in people who've been ignored their whole lives, they don't just succeed, they change the world around them." Khalid nodded, his voice firm. "True, wealth isn't measured in gold or skyscrapers. It's measured in the people you uplift. This boy taught me that." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the glittering towers of Dubai, Samuel translated for Japanese investors in flawless precision, closing a $500 million deal that would echo across global markets. And as Khalid watched the boy who once stood humiliated in his office, he realized the greatest lesson of his life, that true power never came from money or cruelty, but from recognizing brilliance where the world refused to look.